This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform where entrepreneurs can easily create and customize their own personal or professional website. More on Squarespace later in the video.
So hello and welcome to another episode of Biographics. I am your interim host, Karl Smallwood. That's Karl with a K, Smallwood, unfortunately with a small and then a wood directly after it. And today we're talking about Lucille Ball, the redhead with Moxy who changed television forever. And something I like to do on Biographics videos is note that these videos are a team effort. In fact, half a dozen people's hands touch the script before I even get my eyes on it. And the first hands to touch it are those of the author. And today that author is James CJ, so give them a follow at the social media links below, and some love down in the comments for researching the living hell out of this video for us. So, let's get to it. In the first half of the 20th century, television was still relatively new to the world. It was far different from what we know today. Numerous aspects of television and its advancement can be traced directly back to two people, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. For over a decade, the two starred in one of history's most successful and influential sitcoms, I Love Lucy. The pair, madly in love in a marriage doomed to fail, but together created an empire. Lucille Ball is likely the name that you know more, and it's easy to understand why that's the case. The fiery redhead was on screen for decades in several successful shows, whereas eventually became more involved behind the scenes. Now, both of their stories are filled with ups and downs, but despite it all, together they propelled one another to unbelievable heights. But in specific regards to Lucille Ball, she was a firecracker who knew what she wanted and ensured that she got it, and was one half of television's most influential couples. This is the story of the unstoppable Lucille Ball. It was on August 6, 1911 that Lucille Ball was born to Henry and Desiree Ball in Jamestown, New York. They returned home to Montana before moving again for work in Michigan. Soon after moving, Mary was pregnant again. The family was happy and doing well. Unfortunately, this was about to change. You see, in 1915, cases of typhoid fever were being reported across the Detroit area, and despite Desiree's best efforts, Henry contracted the deadly disease. Lucille, being only 3.5, was forbidden from seeing her father lest she catch it too. Her mother, being too pregnant to run after a 3-year-old and care for a sick husband at the same time, solved this issue, shall we say, by slapping a dog collar on the rambunctious toddler and leaving her in the backyard, only removing the collar when a neighbour happened by, because that's not exactly the best look. As for her father, at 28 years old on February 28, 1915, he succumbed to the effects of his disease. Later that year, her brother Fred was born fatherless. Now, the family was forced to move in with Desiree's parents, Fred and Flora Hunt. Fred became the closest thing to a father figure in Lucille's life, and at this time, Desiree was suffering from postpartum depression, largely due to the death of her husband, which is completely understandable. Eventually, Desiree managed to find something of her former self and took a round trip to California. When she returned, she was happier and eventually met and married, in Ball's own words, a sporty 6.5-foot salesman named Ed Peterson. Now, Peterson and Ball's relationship was, to put it diplomatically, frosty, with the pair's first interaction, according to the 9-year-old Ball, being angrily chastised by Peterson for asking if she could call him Daddy, to which he responded, "No, call me Ed." Ball's mother ultimately moved to Detroit with Peterson, once again leaving her child in the care of her parents, or in this case, her new parents-in-law, who were, according to Lucille Ball, quite harsh. Again, quoting the comedienne herself, almost everything she did would be criticised, from combing her hair, which was apparently too vain, to singing whilst washing the dishes, which meant she wasn't paying attention to the job, all of which resulted in her quite understandably developing something of a complex. The children eventually escaped their stepfather's strict Scandinavian mother, again quoting Ball, and rejoined their own mother and were swiftly sent back to the Hunts, who then experienced a tragedy of their own when Flora passed away. Fred was now on his own, trying to raise his daughter's kids, with Lucille helping where she could. But with age comes promiscuity and rebellion, and Lucille had both in spades. It's time to take a break from whatever certainly interesting thing I was just talking about to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace, and I'm joined by the team from behind the scenes to discuss that. So, tell me about Squarespace, close by Raddles.
Well, Squarespace is a platform that can be used to create websites.
A website that makes websites. Who'd have thunk it? Incredible!
Anybody can make a website on there, from amateurs to professionals.
What about me? I'm an idiot. Can I make a website on there?
You should be able to make a website.
Okay, so me, an idiot, could make a website using Squarespace?
Yeah, it's very intuitive. They have this thing called the Fluid Engine, which I believe you're aware of.
Yes, it's the thing they used in Wave Race 64, yes, on the GameCube.
It is, but it's also the thing that allows you to drag and drop elements onto your website and rearrange them and customize them in any way you like.
So dragging and dropping. Perfect. I love dragging and dropping, except in word processors. But what about, Brad, if I'm horribly uncreative?
Then you can use one of their templates to get you started.
Perfect. That suits me. I'm an idiot and I'm uncreative. Excellent. This sounds like the service for me.
And if you're wondering what to do with your website, there's obviously plenty of things you can do. You could create a blog.
Well, of course people want to hear my thoughts. I'm a man on the internet.
Or you could create a course where you could sell your time or your expertise.
Well, of course, we've established that I'm an uncreative idiot. Of course, I want to sell my expertise on things that I don't know about. Squarespace would let me do that. Thank you to today's sponsor. Check out Squarespace at squarespace.com/biographics for 10% off on your first purchase of a website/domain using the code Biographics. I'd like to end, as I often do in these ad spots, with a little bonus fact. Did you know that the BBC once convinced thousands of people across the UK that spaghetti grew on trees? But we don't have time to talk about that because we'll get back to the video. If you want to know more, ask us in the comments and maybe we'll tell you. Lucille saw a monumental change in her teen years. She was a product of the time, the Roaring Twenties. Her hair bobbed, a raccoon coat, and a tremendous height for her age all saw to her becoming something of a gal about town. And for anyone curious about the height thing, Ball stood at 5 feet 7 inches tall in an era when most men stood a hair shorter than that, at about 5'6". Undeniably beautiful, it was around this time that Ball received the nickname the Jamestown Hussy. It was not necessarily a glowing compliment, but it was a part she both looked and acted. In her later years, in reference to her legendary and voracious appetite for men, Ball herself will be quoted as saying simply, "I just fall in love a lot." As a student, Lucille never really applied herself. She was far more interested in a world outside of school, even looking to drop out at 15 to chase her dreams of Broadway and vaudeville by attending a theatrical academy in New York City. Unfortunately, Lucille wouldn't make it past the probationary period of 6 weeks, as the school claimed Desiree was wasting her money and her daughter had no future as an actor. How wrong they were. Ball moved back to Jamestown High School and even took on a part-time job to help pay Desiree back for the efforts in the city. Life moved on. Lucille lived the life of a normal teenager for about a year when she decided she wanted to leave for the city once again and try once more. In 1930, Lucille began commuting between Jamestown and New York City far more frequently. She'd hitch rides in cabs of trucks, on motorcycles, and just about anything to get to and from the city. This cemented her reputation as a bad girl, and these years yielded little in terms of success in show business of any kind. After a while, Lucille returned to Jamestown once again and stayed, this time at her mother's request. Lucy would eventually return to New York City, falling in love with a 25-year-old along the way. From her boyfriend, she'd become a smoker, a drinker, and user of all kinds of foul language. In 1931, Lucille returned to the city working as a secretary and freelance model, modelling under the name Diane Belmont, a name that sounds kind of fancy until you realise she got it from a nearby racetrack, the Belmont. Anyway, her time as a model, while not immediately profitable or leading to any long-term work, did grant her rare access to the upper echelons of New York high society, from whom she learned everything she could in between modelling fancy coats and fending off the advances of rich bachelors and the husbands of those she was serving. Reportedly, Lucille Ball was an exceptional salesperson, largely due to her ability to make the customers laugh, and as a result, want to keep coming back to interact with her. It's also during this time that Ball took to dyeing her hair platinum blonde. She was born a brunette, making her look markedly different from the fiery redhead the world would come to know, fear, and begrudgingly respect, but more on that later. Moving on, in 1933, she was selected as a Chesterfield girl, shilling cigarettes to the masses on billboards across the city. Oddly, Ball didn't apply for this job, but kind of fell into it ass backwards. To explain, to make ends meet, she'd occasionally do modelling work for painters, one of whom painted Ball wearing an elegant chiffon dress she'd sneakily borrowed from work, we should add, and sold it to the Chesterfield Cigarette Company. She didn't get any money for this. Around the same time, Ball also did a number of screen tests for a handful of movies. I mean, they didn't go anywhere, but this was the furthest she'd gotten so far. Now, one day, Lucille, on her way to the garment district, bumped into a high-profile agent named Sylvia Harlow, whom she'd worked with before on her 1933 screen test. After quite literally dropping the ball, she now needed her and was hired for a job with Goldwyn's as a chorus girl. Finally, after 10 long years, she had her foot in the door of the industry. She packed her bags and left for California to appear in her first movie. Following Lucille's stint as an uncredited chorus girl as a Goldwyn girl in Roman scandals, Ball moved to Hollywood permanently. Throughout the 1930s, Ball would star in numerous RKO movies in a series of small roles. Any opportunity she got, she took, regardless of the magnitude of the part that she played. Eventually, Lucille got a 3-bedroom bungalow and began convincing her family to move in with her. In 1934, Ball found herself at Columbia Pictures. She got to star in a Three Stooges film, Three Little Pigskins, one of her earliest credits. When once asked if working with three icons of comedy helped her in her own later comedy career, Ball would quip that all she really learned from the Stooges was how to duck. The episode ends with her being sprayed with a seltzer bottle. She would then quip afterwards of, "I didn't even manage that, I still got wet." Moving on, not long after, changes at Columbia meant that almost everybody lost their jobs, including Lucille Ball. Once again, she was out of a job, but while at dinner, her date told her RKO was having an open call for showgirls, and with that, she went, auditioned, and got a job as a chorus girl once again. Lucille continued having small roles here and there, some uncredited and most without lines. Eventually, Lily Rogers, mother to Ginger Rogers and head of RKO's talent school, took Lucille under her wing, helping her revamp her image, refining her vocabulary, having her take elocution lessons, changing her sound, and overall improving her acting skills. Rogers was instrumental in creating the Lucille Ball we'd come to know and love, even being one of the earliest people to comment on Ball's natural affinity for comedy and making people laugh. Describing Ball not as a comedian, as so many others would come to do so, including ourselves in this video, but rather fittingly instead as a clown with glamour. So what was next for this clown with glamour, the revamped Lucille Ball? After getting an image and personality overhaul, Lucille Ball would continue at RKO doing just about anything they told her to do. For a while, she would do stage performances between films in the studio's backlot theatre. Eventually, she landed a role in That Girl from Paris, earning rave reviews for her comedic skill. From there, she'd head back to the stage, but this time to Broadway in a play called Hey Diddle Diddle. Unfortunately, the play closed after 3 weeks of touring due to mediocre reviews and the health of its lead, meaning she never actually made it to Broadway. Defeated, Lucille returned to California and went back to RKO, starring in minor and supporting roles. Between September 1938 and the end of 1939, she was essentially the queen of B-movies. One of the most critical moments in her life was coming because in 1940, RKO purchased the screen rights for an adaptation of the Broadway show Too Many Girls, starring none other than original cast member Desi Arnaz. And it didn't take long for Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz to fall madly in love with one another. It was almost instantaneous. In fact, according to Ball, she fell in Arnaz literally from the moment he first opened his mouth, in her own words. Desi opened his mouth and began talking in his peculiar brand of broken English, and a great belly laugh burst out of me. Here was this stunningly handsome male who was not only thrilling, but funny. What a combination! For a while, they were just spending time together. Eventually, though, they could no longer deny their feelings for one another, and they called off their own relationships and began a passionate love affair that would ultimately take the world by storm. While the couple initially tried to play it cool, their chemistry and attraction for one another was undeniable, causing many of their co-stars to openly bet around set how long such a fast romance could possibly last. The two began spending almost every waking moment together, whether it was to film Too Many Girls or going out to nightclubs. They were out and about dancing and drinking the night away. When filming wrapped, Desi stayed in LA and tried to find work while Lucille continued at RKO. Desi eventually had to return to work for the Chicago run of Too Many Girls. The two would have a period of time where they saw each other as much as they could, but never enough to satisfy their longing to be together. And we do try to keep these videos PG because we want to have ads run against them, but it's worth noting that part of the reason the two want to spend so much time together is because they apparently spend a lot of time doing the horizontal hug, with their sexual exploits being the stuff of Hollywood legend. But that's a story for another day in a video that wouldn't get monetized, so I move quickly on. And it was during these periods of being apart where their jealousy got the best of them. Eventually, Desi told Lucille while she was visiting him in New York that he'd made plans to marry her the following day if she wanted to go along with it. Lucille, in what she would call the boldest thing she ever did, agreed. The next morning, they headed to Connecticut and eloped before returning to work, foregoing a honeymoon or even buying a ring. A task that ultimately fell to Arnaz's manager, who had to quickly run to a drugstore and buy a ring made of brass because jewelers weren't open. This would become one of the actress's most treasured keepsakes, even after Arnaz bought her, in her own words, a much nicer platinum ring. They'd eventually be back in LA together, getting their new home, which they called Desilu, a name that would one day be worth an absolute fortune. So it was 1941, the world was at war, and America was just coming out of the Great Depression. Lucille and Desi's home had forced them to live on a strict budget. The reality is that the two stars were, like many people in the industry, struggling actors. Lucille was still not getting anywhere in the form of a big break, and Desi was struggling to find work in general. Things got worse as the now over 30 actress was beginning to get a hint that RKO was starting to get bored of her. Desi wasn't facing much luck on his end either, being wholly unused by RKO. During this time, Lucille suffered very sadly a miscarriage which put a strain on the couple and their relationship, along with Desi's stagnating career and Ball's fear of being axed by RKO. Desi struggled because Lucille was far more famous and making much more money than he was for the family. As a result, he went back to music for a while until the war called on him for his service. In 1942, Lucille lost her job at RKO with her final film, 7 Days Leave. Now, both performers were unemployed, which would change relatively quickly, at least for Ball, who signed a long-term contract with MGM on August 6, 1942. Along with helping her career, this stint at MGM also helped define Ball's look, with it being an MGM exec who is said to have told Ball to dye her hair, which at the time was platinum blonde, a fierce shade of red, but more on that later. After a brief period at MGM, Desi went off to serve his country. While Desi was away, Lucille continued acting, but quickly found MGM was also growing bored of her, making the gaps between performances larger and appearances on screen much smaller. While 1944 saw a dramatic rise in productions at MGM, Lucille was rarely benefiting at all, having almost been entirely sidelined. Around this time, things between Lucille and Desi had worsened, with the affairs resulting in Lucille's moving out and filing for divorce. This didn't last, of course. In fact, it lasted less than half a day, and due to California law invalidating divorces if the couples reconciled within a year, the divorce was never finalized. In 1948, a project would come and be the stepping stone for her ascension to household name. Lucille was offered a role on a radio show called My Favorite Husband. The show turned out to be quite a big success, so much so that CBS wanted to turn it into a television series. Lucille's salary shot up to $3,500 a week, and she got a 3-picture deal with Columbia Pictures. A little show on the radio had changed the game for Ball, but this was just the tip of the iceberg. By 1949, it was obvious that there were discussions of adapting My Favorite Husband for television. Eventually, they approved of the jump, but Lucille didn't want to do the show without her husband. Nobody was really interested in this proposal, with executives balking at the idea of the pairing, and even going as far to suggest that audiences wouldn't believe that the pair were married. You know, even though they were literally married in real life, and their initial affair and later marriage had been widely publicised due to a number of factors, chief among them Ball's age. You see, she was 6 years older than Desi, an issue that was apparently so taboo. Ball is said to have lied about her age when filling out her own marriage licence. Also, keep in mind this was the 1950s, so there were also concerns that an interracial couple would rile up racists. Why the studio cared about this is an issue for another day, and one that would probably just frustrate me talking about. Anyway, to prove that casting Desi was the right move, yet casting her husband to play her husband on a show, the couple hit the road and performed in a vaudeville act together, proving that audiences love their chemistry, and also that they had chemistry, which, yes, they were husband and wife in real life. When plans for My Favorite Husband on television died down, Lucille and Desi worked with writers to devise a new show and pitch it to CBS and other networks. NBC and CBS were the main contenders, but they were slow to come to the table. Eventually, CBS, which was struggling in the rating, decided, why the hell not, let's take a chance on a series with 2 really determined stars. Desi managed to come up with a deal to do the show in a way that had never really been done before, keeping them in LA. While Lucille was pregnant for the 4th time after 3 unfortunate miscarriages throughout her time with Desi, Lucille gave birth to Lucy Arnaz on July 17, 1951. Lucille would take a short time off before returning to prepare for what would become a bona fide cultural phenomenon. Desi eventually became the show's main producer, with Ball acting more as a creative talent, always providing her input in the stories they were telling and how they were telling them. The show began coming together with changes made like adding in neighbours, Fred and Ethel, who were the main characters' friends. William Fawley and Vivian Vance signed on, rounding out the cast. I Love Lucy premiered on October 15, 1951. At the time, the series was extremely over budget, and alarm bells were ringing at CBS headquarters, where it was estimated they'd lose $500,000 in the first year of the show. Now, the show wasn't an immediate success by any means. By the end of November 1951, the show ranked as the 16th most popular show with audiences. In 1952, however, it was 5th place with an average audience of 21 million viewers. The show was very quickly becoming a runaway success, and everyone was watching the show across America, which is far more literal than people might realise, but we'll get to that in a moment. So when it comes to firsts on TV, Lucille holds the title for many of these. It was the first show made using film, which ultimately changed everything and everyone had known about television. It showed the first ensemble cast, the first interracial couple, and the first on-screen pregnancy, with Ball appearing pregnant on screen with her second child, whom she gave birth to in 1953. Adorably, the episode in which her fictional child was born aired on the same day she actually gave birth, a moment reportedly watched by over 70% of TV-owning American homes. Speaking of which, the show was also the first to reach over 10 million homes. So, quite literally, almost all of America, or at least all of the Americans with access to a television, were watching this show. It's probably also worth noting that almost all of these historic firsts came with a fight with the networks who often opposed taking such risks, making it a constant back and forth till they eventually relented, which they almost always did, because it almost always worked out. The pregnancy arc was reportedly particularly fraught with arguments, with the studio only relenting on the grounds that nobody on the show used the word pregnant. No, we're not making that up. In regards to the show, Lucille was nominated for I Love Lucy several times, winning an Emmy in 1956. With the success of I Love Lucy came a spotlight on both Ball and Arnaz that they'd never really been used to. 1953 saw questions about Ball's alleged communist affiliations being brought to light. When she was younger, she did list her party affiliation as communist, as did her family. The communist aspect of Ball's past was mainly a result of her grandfather's insistence. The FBI investigated but didn't really find any evidence of communist activity. It did prompt Lucille and Desi to address the issue in a warm-up to I Love Lucy, with Desi saying, and I quote, "The only thing read about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not legitimate." The audience cheered for Ball as she walked out onto the soundstage, and despite the lack of any evidence of communist activity, there were real concerns that CBS might pull the plug on the show. As an aside, while it's commonly stated that Lucille Ball was a redhead, like, in this video, her own hairstylist, Irma Koosley, would later note in an interview with the Television Academy Foundation that technically her hair was golden apricot in colour, and that maintaining it was a total and complete pain in the arse. Eventually, a solution to getting the exact right shade was found in the form of a henna rinse, which came with its own set of issues, until Ball happened upon a wealthy man in Las Vegas who agreed to send her a box of the really good stuff. A box Ball literally kept under lock and key, storing it in a safe in her stylist's garage. And I don't like saying garage, it's a garage. But yes, so that's how she maintained her now iconic red hair, or golden apricot hair. The solution to it was literally kept under lock and key. Moving on, I Love Lucy continued until 1968 and then was replaced with the Lucy Desi Comedy Hour, which was essentially just an hour-long episode of I Love Lucy with the entire cast reprising their roles from the original show. It ran for 3 seasons and produced 13 hour-long specials in total. While filming their comedy hour, the marriage between Lucille and Desi suffered as a result of the stress of the business, filming, and Desi's struggle with addictions, but that's something we'll get into in his own video. Eventually, Lucille had enough, calling for a divorce between the two in early 1960. Ending one of the most famous and influential couples in television history. Despite an intense history and the fact they still had to work together, Lucille and Desi remained firm friends, largely thanks to a relatively smooth divorce. While they undeniably love one another, their marriage just couldn't work. Some might argue that had been a case for a long time, but a second chance at love was around the corner, at least for Ball. Ball would head back to Broadway for a production of Wildcat. The show itself wasn't really successful critically, with quite terrible reviews, frankly. Regardless, thanks to Wildcat, she met comedian Gary Morton through the show's writer. They dated for a while before tying the knot on November 19th, 1961. Unlike Ball's previous marriage, being married to Morton was calm. He was supportive of his wife, got along with her children, and loved her the way Lucille had always wanted to be loved. Of course, her marriage made working with Desi difficult at times, as is wont to happen when you're working with your ex. 1962 saw Lucille return to TV with her new series, The Lucy Show, reuniting Ball with former co-star Vivian Vance, who was on the show for 3 seasons. Like I Love Lucy, Ball's new show was a success. It ran for 6 seasons from 1962 to 1968 and earned Ball 2 more Emmy wins. Things were changing at Desilu and not for the better. The major issue was Desi's worsening addictions and his efforts at Desilu faltering. Again, more on that in his own biographics. The once innovative man was now turning his nose up at innovation, refusing to do the Lucy show in colour, even though colour TVs were booming in sales. Eventually, in 1962, Ball bought Desi's shares as he retired from Desilu, meaning that she was now the first woman to become president of a major television studio. What an absolute legend. During her tenure, Ball struggled with balance and the realities of running a massive burgeoning empire. Thankfully, her own hit show and a few others, along with the rented sound stages, helped soften the blow of diminishing results and returns with pilots and earnings. Lucy was also struggling with the pressures of the job and her show. The workload affected the series, with the decline in quality becoming quite apparent, even to the casual observer. Regardless, the ratings remained strong. Eventually, things would improve, with several pilots turning into highly successful series in their own right, including Mission Impossible, Star Trek, and Mannix. In regards to Star Trek, while Ball had no idea what the show was about, assuming it was about something to do with World War II, she did believe in its vision. She used her considerable clout to insist upon a second pilot of the show being made after a first did poorly with test audiences, something that rarely happens in the television industry because, much like real life, second chances aren't all that common. This act has seen Ball being referred to as the woman who saved Star Trek. Anyway, come 1967, Lucille was ready to walk away from the Lucy show and Desilu. She sold the company to Gulf and Western, who'd become the owners of Paramount, and in turn CBS, which was a Desilu collaborator. The sale made Ball an estimated $17 million, and after the sale, she returned for a sixth and final season of The Lucy Show. Once her second sitcom ended, CBS kept her around, knowing she'd come back with something new, and they were right, of course. Post-Desilu 1968 saw Lucille dominate the airwaves, once again with her third sitcom, Here's Lucy. The show starred Ball and her two children. She also appeared regularly on The Carol Burnett Show, with whom she was close friends. Here's Lucy was a hit. Sure, it wasn't on the same level as I Love Lucy, not many things could be, but the numbers were still fantastic for a sitcom star's third outing. With the end of the show in 1974, this marked the final time Ball was regularly on the television screens of millions. Of note about Here's Lucy is a remarkably meta moment when Lucille Ball's character Lucy Carter met Lucille Ball, the actress, within the confines of the show, an effect achieved with split-screen technology, meaning we can genuinely say that during the show, Lucille Ball played Lucille Ball opposite Lucille Ball playing Lucy. She's weird, right? From there, Ball's career would begin to slow down. Following her last film in theatres with Mamma in 1974, she began sticking to TV for the rest of her career, usually just doing TV movies here and there, guest spots and talk show appearances and the like. Life was no longer as fast-paced as it was, but after such an incredible career, Lucille was fine with that, at least for now. In her later years, Lucille attempted to make a TV comeback of sorts by starring in a TV movie and finally returning to her fourth sitcom, Life with Lucy, in 1986. Unfortunately, this one failed to find its audience and was cancelled within 2 months. During her attempt to recapture sitcom success with Life with Lucy, Ball experienced tragedy when her former business partner, on-screen husband, current ex-husband, Desi passed away. Lucille's own declining health saw her unable to relive the glory days or make any new ones for that matter. On April 18, 1989, Lucille Ball found herself in hospital after she experienced persistent chest pains. She was then diagnosed with a dissecting aortic aneurysm which required surgery. The surgery was successful as they managed to perform the 7-hour aortic valve replacement. On April 26, 1989, at the age of 77, Lucille Ball passed away. Doctors determined that the cause of death was Ball succumbing to an abdominal aortic aneurysm. Her death was a heavy blow to the world that had fallen in love with her several decades ago. A particularly bittersweet note here is that Ball died on the birthday of her longtime friend, Karl Burnett, who, moments after hearing of Ball's passing, received a bunch of flowers in the mail Ball had ordered prior to her passing. In previous years, Ball had promised to send her flowers every year on her birthday. Lucille Ball's legacy is undeniable. Together with Desi Arnaz, Lucille changed television forever, and some would say the better. As a result of her efforts in television, both in front of and behind the camera, she was given 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960. Even over 3 decades later, Lucille Ball's legacy remains irrefutable. Lucille's career was an unorthodox and rocky one at times, but with Desi Arnaz, she achieved monumental success. The success carried on for decades following the end of her marriage and the hit sitcom that defined it. I Love Lucy was a title, but also a fact for the millions who still adored the red-headed actress who shaped the world of sitcoms and television. Lucille Ball was, and remains, one of TV's brightest stars. So hopefully everyone at home found this video to be entertaining, informative and educational. If you are inclined to agree, why don't I give the script's author, James CJ, some love over on social media. While you're clicking on buttons down below, like the video, comment with feedback, suggestions, any of that good stuff, and subscribe for more content like this. Also, I'd like to reiterate something I mentioned at the start of this video, that Biographics videos, Geographics videos and Top 10s videos are all a joint effort with at least a dozen people working on videos before they get to your eyeballs at home. So yeah, just, if you're down there, leaving comments and stuff, leave comments for, all the people who work behind the scenes. We have our editors, our script writers, our video editors, the people who do the thumbnails, the people who work behind the scenes, like securing us sponsorships and the like, so we can continue to pay everyone who does all of those jobs. Otherwise, as I always like to say, cheers to everyone watching at home, and go out there and have the day that you deserve.